Hello, this is Mortgage Paul. I'm sitting down with Lori Gale today. She's a real estate agent who focuses on commercial properties and has a lot of expertise and knowledge in it, so this is why I wanted to sit down with her today. So Lori, thanks for sitting down with me.
My pleasure.
Can you explain what a commercial real estate agent is?
It's a practitioner that deals primarily with commercial properties, and there's kind of a broad range involved in that. That does take in multifamily, medical, office, industrial, land. There's all sorts of things. It's a pretty broad range.
Lori, what makes something commercial?
The use of the property, and that I think would probably originate with the zoning, which is something that's established independently by the communities.
So each city has their own zoning commission?
That's right. Each city, municipality. In Salt Lake County, for example, you have not only the regulations that are set up by Salt Lake County itself, but each individual city is also self-governing that way, the ones that are incorporated. And they all have their own sets of zoning laws, their own codes, and it's important to pay close attention to those because they do change from city to city.
Lori, how does zoning affect commercial real estate?
Dramatically.
Really?
Oh, yes. Basically, the city has what they call a general plan where they designate certain areas for specific types of uses. Some of the different commercial zones would include industrial, light industrial, retail, office, mixed use. There's a whole number of them, and the uses and conditional uses are usually set out in a table for each separate zone in the zoning ordinances for the city.
Okay, so let me give you an idea that went through my head that I ran into. Let's say that you have a home that was in a relatively secluded area 20, 40, 60 years ago, and commercial things have built up around it. The road's been widened, and what was a 2-lane residential road is now a 4-lane, funnel road. I don't know what the word I'm looking for.
A feeder road.
A feeder road.
Yeah.
A feeder road. And let's say I had this scenario before where grandma passes away, the children inherit the property, they look at this and they say, wow, this has all been developed now. This is worth so much more than it was before because it's not just a regular home anymore, it's commercial now in the area.
Yes.
Could that be true?
That could be true. It would depend on several factors, however, and one of the factors would be what the actual zoning was for the property presently. Second, you'd have to look at the size of the property and the dimensions, how much frontage there is. For commercial purposes, frontage is kind of a big deal. Also, you'd want to know the traffic counts for various types of retail. That's a very important factor. You'd have to look at, every property you have to really look at individually to determine its highest and best use. But all of those factors I mentioned before definitely play a very big part in determining what the best use for the property is.
Okay, so could you explain what traffic counts means?
Oh, yes. It's a statistic that's kept usually by the Department of Transportation, UDOT, where the little cameras at various intersections keep a record of how many cars pass by a given location during any specific day. And they keep a record of that over a period of time. And those traffic counts are used to help determine it gives UDOT information that they need, but for retailers and other types of operatives, it tells them if it's a location they really want, because certain types of businesses rely very heavily on drive-by traffic for their clientele and customers.
Oh, I see. So if you were an industrial plumbing supply company focusing on plumbers, you wouldn't be as concerned about drive-by traffic as, say, maybe a McDonald's?
Not at all, because plumbers or a plumbing supply house relies on a completely different source of advertising to gain clientele. They don't have a lot of drop-by people. The plumbers know where to go.
Yeah, okay. something you had mentioned before we had talked, sign ordinances. What's
Yes.
a sign ordinance?
A sign ordinance is a law that is established by the community to determine the type of signage for advertising purposes is allowed in the various zones. And anytime a business is looking to locate within a certain location, it's very important to check the sign ordinance to determine if they can do what they really want in that location, because it changes from zone to zone. So it's really important to check that.
You know what? Yeah. Now that you mention it, just ideas come to my head. I've been driving by businesses and I didn't know they were there. That's probably because we were prevented from putting a sign.
Yes, that could be, or they could have one that's really old and antiquated. I saw one in West Jordan about a month ago when I was showing property. A landlord had a smaller piece of property that was abutting a nice big retail establishment that sat back off of the frontage quite a ways. It had its parking in front, which is fine, but the way the buildings were set up around it, it kind of put it back in this pocket. And the sign they had was a pole monument sign, a pole sign out in the front along on the parking strip, but it was old and antiquated and really not very appealing at all. And when I discussed it with her, she told me she was having a difficult time keeping the big commercial building in the back leased, and I suggested that she invest some real money into that sign, because from the perspective of being able to see it, visibility, the only visibility they had was that sign, and it needs to be something eye-catching. Otherwise, they never fill up that space.
Okay. Another thing that I've heard in commercial real estate, and this is kind of a buzzword that people talk about now, is called highest and best use.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean? Give me a layman's term.
Highest and best use it's a principle. It's really very broad, but what it is any particular property has its highest and best use. I'll just give you an example. A few years ago, we had a client with a hotel downtown in Salt Lake City in the D3 zone, and this hotel was a two-story hotel on almost 5 acres, and property in downtown Salt Lake, just ground, is worth upwards of $25 a square foot, which is a very, very high value. And in the D3 zone particularly, because in the D3 zone you can go up 250 feet, so you can build a high-rise. Where this hotel was a two-story hotel, probably 35 years old, needing a lot of rehab. I came to him with a plan to tear down the old hotel and put up a high-rise with condominiums up above and retail down below, because that, in order to do that type of a development, that's what you needed, was retail on the bottom, and then you could do the multifamily residential on top. It was a $350 million project with a gigantic profit picture. And to me, by far, the highest and best use for that property, because the existing hotel was only worth about $13 million, where you had a $300 million potential with the land that was there and the current zoning.
Well, that's fascinating. So now the next question is financing. Let's say
Yes.
he came and said, he agreed and said that I would be willing to do that. Where would he get the money for that?
Banks and investors.
Are those hard to acquire? Are those hard to get?
For something that size, yeah, you need some really deep pockets for something like that. In fact, the church recently did a project like that in downtown Salt Lake. The City Creek project was an enormous change in the way they designed that. But the church has some very deep pockets, and in order to do something like that, I think that you'd probably have to have about between 60 and 100 million of your own money walking into it, or the bank wouldn't touch it.
Okay. Wow. You need money to make money, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
That was a project that only the right party could take on, just because of the size of it.
Okay, Lori. Well, thanks for meeting with me today.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate this, because this is stuff that my people know nothing about, and so that's why I brought you in. How would someone get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you about commercial property?
You can call me at 801-205-1600, or if it's more convenient and you have a web handy, you can reach our website at www.utahrealtysource.com.
Okay,
Thank you.
Lori.
My
Thanks for
pleasure.
coming in. This is Mortgage Paul, sitting down with Lori Gale today, talking about commercial real estate. Please subscribe. We'll be adding new videos as we go along, as I find new people who have interesting things to share about real estate.